Good morning, everybody. And as you can see, back in the office today, wonderful to reach out to all of you. I've had some of the challenges that some of you may have when you come into the office again and start using technology, and hence my apology why the webinar has started a little bit late today. So I take full responsibility for it, but I'm really grateful that you've all joined us. In essence, the speaker series really is a monthly webinar for our financial advisors, our partners, and it really is an opportunity for us to share intellectual leadership, great ideas, and great concepts with all of you. Hopefully, the speaker series acts as a rudder for your week ahead. And I always talk to my team, it's the mental protein. It's what drives us forward and gives us that competitive edge when we're talking to customers or even our staff in terms of driving them and motivating them for the weeks ahead. Now, each speaker series, we pride ourselves to try and find new and innovative thinkers. And I think the team have gone above and beyond for the weeks ahead. So as is tradition, I'd like to just quickly share with you that our autumn speaker series will be hosted by BT Sports presenter and chart-topping podcast host Jake Humphreys. And the first one will be on the 16th of September. And the feature will have a numerous top guests. So we've actually got neuroscience and psychologist Dr. Julia Jones. We have ESG thought leader Julia Dreblow and a professor of sustainable development Matthew Gitchin. So a whole range of interesting speakers. They'll be covering topics such as high performance sports psychology, which is a real goodie, how to hack your brain. How to hack your brain, and the ever-changing ESG landscape and what it means for us as professionals. So watch out for the updates on the Advisor Hub, and I look forward to seeing many of you joining the program. So now let's talk about today. Let's talk about healthcare. Let's look about the changing landscape. Let's talk about the increased awareness and relevance of healthcare at this moment in time. Never more has our model been more relevant than in a post-COVID world. So in terms of talking about this new evolution and where healthcare is going, it was really worthwhile to bring some real experts on the show today to talk a little about how they see healthcare evolving, the sales of healthcare, and where they see the healthcare market growing. So on that note, I'd like to firstly highlight that our host today is Adam Saville, someone you all know very well. I'm actually using his computer today, Adam, so thank you very much. On the panel today, we have not only do we have real experts, but we have real friends. So Claire Ginnelly, the Managing Director from Premier Choice, is here to share her views and her expertise. We've got Ian Sawyer, the Director of Assured Futures. And from Vitality itself, we have Dr. Ali Hasan. I'm certainly excited to hear what the panel has to say. Now, this is going to be one of the most non-professional transitions. So I'm going to hand over to Adam. I'm going to move over to the side of the desk, but thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Greg, and hello, everyone. As Greg mentioned, I'm Adam Saville, Intermediary Content Editor for Vitality, and today we're going to be considering what's next for PMI. So in the face of limited access to healthcare and with health and well-being in the spotlight in the UK, it's safe to say that demand for health insurance is only going to increase. So today's conversation will address how advisors are going about meeting the needs of clients in the present climate, and how the role of insurance providers are also evolving. So I'm joined by Claire Ginnelly, as Greg mentioned, Managing Director of Premier Choice. Hi, Claire.
Hi.
We've got Ian Sawyer, Commercial Director for Assured Futures. Hey, Ian.
Morning.
And Dr. Ali Hasan, Chief Medical and Healthcare Officer for Vitality. So before we start, please remember that we are taking your questions throughout the discussion, and there'll be some time at the end for us to ask those questions to our panelists. But to kick things off, I think it would be great to get a clinical perspective. So, Ali, COVID has transformed the healthcare landscape. How have insurers and advisors had to adapt in the face of that?
Thanks very much for having me here, and it's a pleasure to be here today talking about how PMI might continue to evolve. I'd like to start by recapping what's gone to pass over the past 16 months or so. Many of us remember how different and how immediate things felt in March of 2020, when immediately we went from a nation that was curious about this pandemic to going straight into a lockdown. There was so little known about the impact of coronavirus, apart from the fact it was terrifying, infectious and contagious, that there was a rush for everyone to stop interacting, socializing. And we moved to a position where a lot of care immediately was paused, unless it was of the most urgent face-to-face. This presented a huge opportunity too, where there was, as many people describe it, years of acceleration in terms of digital health in weeks. Since then, we are now roughly 16 months on, and things have evolved significantly too. But a lot of those real emphatic changes that we made at the early start of the pandemic continue to stay with us, have benefited us, and will benefit us in the future. I'd like to talk about three things that are really pivotal, that have changed the experience of health and how they'll continue. And then possibly we can start touching on how that will affect advisors and evolve as we continue in the discussion. The first one, and by far the most present one, is the shift to digital health and online activity too. Recognizing the need for people to minimize their risk of infection by not being in the same places, minimizing access to healthcare facilities, and what some have reported as challenges around accessing GPs in general, insurers in particular really push forward with increasing access to remote video care. This happened across every single type of care you can think of. So for example, at Vitality, we doubled the availability of virtual GP, and we saw a huge increase in phone line contacts. All of our physio and mental health providers switched to be able to offer video
Seem to have temporarily lost Ali's connection there. But while we wait for Ali to come back to us, he seems to have frozen. Ali was just outlining there the dynamic around the increased uptake and distribution of virtual healthcare through things like virtual GPs and other digital healthcare services. So, Claire, is that something you've seen clients demanding more of as an advisor when speaking to clients?
Yes, but I think it depends on the profile of the client that you're talking to, because I agree with Ali that this has been an acceleration of change that would have happened anyway, but actually the speed in which it's happened possibly means that for some people there's a bit of reservation around accessing care digitally, or whether it's getting diagnostics in that way. So I think we do have to appreciate that although it is a big step forward, there are going to be some clients that still like the option of face-to-face care. I think we see that with just our own GPs. I've had to see the GP recently, and I've got quite frustrated that I've not actually been able to sit in front of them. And I'm somebody that actually embraces what we're doing from a virtual GP. So I think it's all good news. I think it is an acceleration of what's been going to be coming down the line anyway. But we do just need to be aware that for some people, they need to understand a little bit more about it and how it can help them.
Has there been a sort of a step change in the way people are thinking about these types of services? I mean, pre-pandemic, virtual GPs were widely available, but they weren't really used as much. But as the pandemic, what we saw almost an obligation or a requirement to start using them, given the situation we're in. So do you think that's just changed the way clients are perceiving them? And does that make it easier for you to talk about them as a result?
Absolutely. I think that what the pandemic has done is demonstrated that actually we can access things in a virtual way. And we are doing things that we never thought we would be able to do. We have adapted in an amazing way in the last 16 months. So yes, I think that for us as advisors to talk about these sort of services that are available on the products more than we were before, possibly historically we were all a little bit guilty of focusing on some of the core benefits of the policy. So talking to people about the sort of outpatient cover they want, the inpatient cover they want, and not giving as much time to the sort of added value benefits, as we used to call them. I don't necessarily think we should refer to them as added value benefits anymore, because they should be seen as a core part of the proposition that we're talking to people about. But yeah, I think as we've had to adapt through the pandemic, then absolutely our conversation with clients should be changing and has had to change.
That's really interesting, and we'll come on to some of the challenges and how advisors are overcoming those challenges around talking about the breadth of value available within propositions. We've got Ali back with us now. That's great. So Ali, we got halfway through point one And Claire picked up and was mentioning about how advisors are seeing that rise in demand, and how actually at the same time face-to-face is also still going to be something that clients are asking for. But how about you finish off the other 2 points that you were raising at the beginning to set us up for the further discussion?
Thank you, and I'm so sorry. I spontaneously seem to have been kicked out of the webinar, and I will be looking into this in detail as soon as this webinar is over. The second point I was going to raise actually is similar to the one Claire's going to talking about changing consumer expectations and what people think good care actually is. We saw a huge decrease, as you'd expect, in the number of people wanting to access care in April and May, and that reflected not just concerns about coronavirus, but people adapting to a dramatically different way of life too. What we've seen as we've continued and lockdowns have gone and come and numbers of coronavirus and community have changed is actually an increasing appetite, not just for people to start returning to healthcare access, but to take more care of their health earlier. There are a whole range of things that can factor into it, anything from increased awareness about health and how that can change, to actually potentially some conditions which they might not have looked at previously progressing and people wanting to get into care earlier. I think the change in preferences and the way that digital care has responded, including in the NHS where there's a lot more phone call or video-based GP, has been reflected in increased satisfaction from many segments of the population. And what's interesting is if you look at the national survey for general practice in the NHS, this is the first year in many years where actually there's been a perception of improvement in access and how people continue. Having said that, to balance that, we do see that particularly in secondary care, lots of people still very much do prefer face-to-face contact. And I think part of that is the therapeutic relationship people get when they interact with people. The third thing, which I think is a more pervasive long-term trend that will continue, is the desire for people to really take control more of their health improvement. I think the fears about COVID that lots of people have had have really encouraged them to take stock. And that's everything from thinking about how they live in general, interact at work, and what they want to do, and recognizing that the time that we have on earth is short, all the way to understanding actually that COVID's risk factors itself are influenced by how much you weigh, whether you're diabetic, whether you smoke. I've seen people really have taken that on board, and it's been a powerful catalyst, as with many other things, for people to start taking more ownership of their health as well as healthcare.
Thanks, Ali. And it sounds as if prevention as well is a huge part of that, and that's something no doubt we'll talk about later on in the discussion. Moving over to you, Ian. What are you seeing? What trends are you seeing from a broker perspective? So, are you seeing a sort of a changing demographic or type of client as a result of some of the trends that Dr. Ali has just pointed out?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a change in every aspect of what we do. I think the challenge that we've had over the last year is to communicate the value of PMI in the face of a pandemic where certain procedures were stopped. The private healthcare was curtailed by the NHS adopting some of the private hospitals, and that became a big story, but actually passed quite quickly. I think there's lots of really positive things in the way the industry has reacted. The greater push for digital GPs, as you mentioned earlier, is one. The increase in NHS cash benefits, I think, was also important to marry the two together, and along with the promise of rebates from insurers to perhaps excess profits that they expected to perhaps make, but perhaps didn't. I would have liked to have seen that work in a slightly quicker fashion, rather than delaying it a year or two to then audit and then refund. I'd like to see more approaches like that some of the societies, the friendly societies, have applied, where they applied instant discounts. But I think the industry has responded well initially, and now it faces a marvelous opportunity, because we're seeing a different demographic of customer coming through with different needs. Customers historically have been focused on quality and luxury. Now it's more about cleanliness, about a fear of overcrowding, worried that the NHS has been kind of worked to near exhaustion, and then it's about accessibility to healthcare. So the challenge for us as advisors is, one, to do our job, our core job of explaining how PMI works, what the product features are, but also the value that customers can drive out of their policy.
It's really interesting, Ian. So you're seeing a sort of slightly different type of customer coming through, and Ali's already talked about how health and wellbeing is very much in the spotlight. There's more awareness around our health and wellbeing as a result of the pandemic, arguably. So is this, for advisors, staying with you, Ian, for a moment, does this provide a challenge or an opportunity, or just something to be mindful of when it comes to the way you position PMI when talking to clients? So, you know, they're coming in with these needs you've just described. So how are you seeing that play out in some of the conversations that you're having with clients?
Well, I think there's two new areas of customer that we're seeing. One, obviously, the new purchasers who have the affordability and are more concerned about the NHS. So there is a massive opportunity in terms of what the core of what we do. There is also a challenge that we get customers who have a different level of affordability and also a lack of understanding of how private medical insurance works. So often we get older customers looking to have insurance for their existing conditions, and being really clear and really informative about how PMI works, so that they can understand that pre-existing conditions are not going to be covered, and that their access to primary care, other than a digital GP, is also still within the NHS. So we do have people looking more for diagnosis, treatment and consultations cover more than we ever did before in terms of a diagnostics only product. So I think there should be some sort of evolution in terms of product features and levels and benefits, focus more on the diagnosis side than all on the treatment side for those other newer areas of customer, especially elderly.
And yeah, I suppose it's about meeting the needs of the client, tailoring it to their budget, but also explaining both the pros and cons of whatever you're offering as an advisor. And that's obviously the role that you have. Moving over to you, Claire, what about in the workplace when it comes to employers? How are you seeing these kind of things play out? Are you finding that employers have got an increased awareness, or there's a willingness to provide healthcare access to their employees? Has that been driven by the pandemic? And how is some of the things that Ian just spoke about? How are those sort of kind of things coming in, those concepts and those conversations coming out in those conversations?
Well, I think traditionally, as an advisor sitting in front of an employer, if you are sitting in front of a large employer, then sort of health and well-being has always been a core part of the conversation. However, if you look at the smaller employers, and as a business, our typical client tends to be the smaller SMEs, then they wouldn't often have those sort of conversations. And it's more about, you know, I've got private medical insurance for my staff because I want to make sure that if they're ill, they can get treatment as quickly as possible and get them back at work as quickly as possible. So for those clients, they wouldn't necessarily realise, going back to Ian's point actually, the value that there is and all the benefits that are available in their policies. So that's where our job really does come into its own, that we have to start having these wider conversations with companies, because whether you're an employer with 5 staff or whether you're an employer with 500 staff, the pandemic will have hit you in some way. And just an example, if you've got 5 people sitting in an office and actually now they're working from home, then there's a whole new range of issues that you're going to have to deal with. And you may not realise that this private medical insurance policy that you'll be paying for every year has some real benefit to you in terms of assisting. MSK issues is a great one. I'll say that because I'm suffering with a bad back at the moment, so I know how it feels. But they may not understand that actually their private medical insurance policy can really assist with these sort of issues. So I think it's down to us as the advisor to be having different conversations with our clients than perhaps we did historically. Now, that's not to say we're suddenly going to become mental health experts, and I'm sure we'll go on to talk about mental health later, but we should, as Ian said, be experts in the products that we're talking to them about, and we should be making them aware of what is available. So it's all around the questions, the fact finding, the understanding your customer. It's asking those questions to really understand what is going on, what are the issues that they're faced with, and demonstrating to them that actually they may already have solutions in the policies they have. But then coming on to the point about more people wanting private medical insurance, actually we are starting to find that. And we were talking to one insurer recently who's doing a lot of work around expansions on group schemes. And we have started to do some work in our own client bank on that, because we know that more people are wanting to have access to private medical insurance. Budgets, as Ian said, are an issue for many people. So it's about looking at the solutions that are out there, and invariably there are solutions for everybody. It may be a cash plan, it may be some sort of diagnostic and outpatient benefits that they have, but there will be solutions out there for everybody.
And the likes of Vitality at Work for those who have already got PMI policy,
yes.
Kind of thing. And we'll come on to the role of the provider as well, Ali, in just a moment. But I think you've touched on a really interesting point there, Claire, around there's now a drive to, or more of a need to understand the many range, the full range of services within a proposition, different types of care, diagnosis, whether it be they're virtual or outpatient, inpatient, all those kind of services that now exist within propositions that are constantly evolving. What's the best way for employers, with the help of advisors, to communicate to their employees, would you say? Because that can be sometimes a challenge, I can imagine.
Yes, and again, I suppose it depends how they're working, and if they are remote still, or if they're back in the office. I think advisors, again, have a great role to play here in offering their services with regards to communicating to members, holding, whether it be webinars, workshops, if they're comfortable being back in the office. We have had such a range of information, really good information from all the insurers, whether it be health insurers, cash plan providers, risk providers, during the pandemic, that we have a wealth of knowledge that we can pass on to the employers, and actually we could possibly pass on to the members, so we could help employers with that communication. So I think that nothing replaces, I was going to say the in-person, but whether that be sort of a webinar or actually in person, as opposed to just relying on email. Of course, email often is good to back up anything that you're discussing, but to hold those sort of sessions, those webinars, and to talk about everything that actually, I would say that I have learned so much from the information that providers have been giving out, that now we are in a more informed position that we can give that information to our clients, so we can help clients with that.
And things have been moving so fast, haven't they? And it's been very difficult to keep up. As an ex-journalist, I know how difficult it was, especially when the pandemic broke, to keep up with everything that was happening, especially even within the industry, let alone the wider world. And obviously the wider world is what informs what happens within the industry. So we'll talk a little bit in a moment, Ali, about the role of the provider. But I guess also there's a real, I mean, Claire touched upon there that the provider has a role to also help provide the knowledge and the information to brokers, not just about proposition, but also, I guess, about a lot of the trends from a clinical perspective that we're seeing out in the health care world. So what's your view on that? And then also we can touch upon how you're seeing the propositions evolve in the market to meet some of those trends.
Thanks very much. I think Claire raised a really good point. I think we communicated more during the pandemic about what we were seeing in terms of the clinical space than we have done in previous years. And we recognized that it was so important to do this because, firstly, things were so very unclear. And even to this day, there are lots of things that are still open questions about how this virus will continue to affect us. And secondly, because the pace and the speed at which information was coming out was so quick, and there was so much conflicting information, living in the age of the internet, and where conflicting information can outpace and outvolume each other, that we felt we had a duty to do so across the insurers more broadly. Most of you can probably remember the debates about whether hydroxychloroquine improves coronavirus, and the ongoing discussion about ivermectin. And it is really, really difficult for anyone to make sense about. Even people like me who are, relatively, I think, sophisticated in terms of understanding health knowledge find it quite difficult. So we thought, the overall challenge must be really, really tough to unpick. I would really like to see more of this continuing as we move on in different stages of the pandemic too. Ultimately, by having more dialogue and being able to share more about what's happening clinically and being able to more interface with our advisors will ultimately be better for our customers and patients, because we feel, we are one of a number of different important routes to provide intelligence and information about how healthcare is evolving. You raise an interesting question about how things are going to evolve over the coming years. If I think about the next 12 to 18 months, in the health system more broadly, thinking about the NHS and the private sector, there is some degree of urgency around what we can broadly define as catch up to. There's lots of column inches devoted to the waiting lists. I read in one place that waiting lists for people over 18 months have reached 50,000 people. So I think that challenge and how we address it sustainably through a mix of improving self-management, improving access, and more creative ways of working in terms of health service provision is going to be absolutely crucial. And there is so much focus on this throughout the world's health systems on addressing this. I think longer term, the benefits of increased efficiency that will invariably come out of that work will become embedded too. And whilst, as we talked about earlier, we've seen a bit of retraction in the use of digital activity as a proportion of healthcare happening, ultimately, I think this will continue to be more and more embedded. When we think about healthcare more broadly and what the digital agenda empowers, alongside better access, better end-to-end visibility is a part of it too. Understanding what's happening in one of our members and one of an advisor's clients and one of patients' life across all the different products they have, across all their different activities, across all their different needs, will help us collectively as an ecosystem supporting these people and customers and groups and businesses to be better and helping them be healthier, have better access to care more effectively, and get the right care at the right time, the right quality, the right cost.
So is there a need then to balance and provide a combination of practical healthcare solutions that are understandable and easy to use for customers, but also at the same time balance that with innovation and the role of technology and how that can actually be embedded within a member-driven approach?
Absolutely, and I think it's important for insurers to work with advisors to really understand what the best potential options there are for them to address some of their activity too. We at health insurers are in a really good position because we encounter lots of the latest and most innovative healthcare providers, in the UK and globally. And we're in a good position because we have large teams who are able to undertake due diligence about the quality, the clinical provenance, and the value that these can offer to our customers. And we can work with our advisors to understand actually what works best for the market, what would significantly change, and how this can help. We at Vitality have done that with lots of different things, from being the first provider to offer telemedicine as an inclusive way to all our policies, all the way to the things we've done more recently, say with PEPI and My Online Therapy. But even for kind of more niche areas, these are areas that we're looking at to think about how we can continue to expand how we support members with all types of different conditions, and companies and customers with all types of different needs.
Thanks, Ali. And moving over to you, Ian. So there's definitely a kind of an always evolving or improving customer journey. So what are you seeing, and how are you explaining some of these things to your clients when it comes to ensuring that they're fully up to speed with how they can get the most out of their policies and how they can have a seamless journey as a healthcare patient?
I think Claire alluded to it earlier. The conversations that we're having to be wider and longer. The customer, explaining the customer journey from start to finish and giving them an example of how PMI will work, especially to a new purchaser, not just a new purchaser, but an existing one as well, is really, really key. So that's very much part of our sales process. Way before we get on to benefits and policy conditions, etc. there is a need, I think, especially with new entrants coming in or new consumers coming into this market, for greater simplification and explanations, because we're still, they may be feeling excluded because of the jargon we use. We're still using terms like medical underwriting by moratoriums and all those types of things, which is a challenge for customers. It's a really complex product, and it takes time, and most sales are now done either digitally or telephony, so you have a limitation of what you can give to a client. So simplification in both product options and terminology is really important, and also application processes. There is a sense of drive towards FMU, which actually makes it more complicated, and we start going down a life insurance type route for medical underwriting. That's, for me, that's problematic. That's a blocker for advisors. That's a blocker for ease of conducting business with consumers. So that it's not just a journey of a claim, it's a journey of application and a journey of the mind to understand what you're purchasing.
Thanks, Ian. Some really good stuff in there. And I want to remind our viewers that we are taking questions. We'll have about 15 to 20 minutes or so, in about 5 minutes or so, to start asking questions. So yeah, please get your questions in so we can ask the panelists those. I'd be interested to hear Claire's thoughts on what Ian was just saying, because there's some really interesting trends there.
Yes, and I was just thinking when Ian was talking about a drive to sort of, so say FMU, I'm using the jargon myself for full medical underwriting, and the problems that can cause at the moment with these sort of blocks at the GP and getting reports back, etc. And more people may look to go down the moratorium route because of the ease, and how that is also sort of fraught with problems if it's not fully explained to people. And it goes back to what we've already said, that actually our conversations with our clients, whether they be the conversations at new business stage, conversations midway through the policy year, or at renewal, they need to be a lot more in depth than possibly they have been historically. Just talking about the different forms of underwriting, I'm a great fan of the moratorium underwriting, but I understand it. I understand it because I live and breathe it. If you don't, it is fraught with problems. But of course, as Ian said, if you go down full medical underwriting, that can cause delays. And I know we've certainly seen quite a bit of that in the sort of protection and life space that has caused issues. So I think that as an industry, we need to make sure that we are making all underwriting options as streamlined as possible, and also the claims process as streamlined as possible. Obviously, you guys have introduced your authorization online recently. So anything of that nature that makes it easier for the client, as Ian has said, has got to be a positive thing for this industry, because it is complex. It does require an explanation, but we need people to remember how things work, and they're more likely to do that if it is simple.
Oh, sorry, Ian, carry on.
Add a point to that, because it's absolutely right. But we also need to be mindful of the future. If we have new consumers coming into the business, we mustn't just focus on their new business, but the simplification of their renewal process as well. And I think this is a massive industry problem, in that we have certain insurers with a sense of protectionism by not sharing claims information, by not sharing exclusions with brokers, making the broker's job to advise their client on renewal much more difficult. That needs to change. We need to be more open, and we need to make switching much more easier between insurance companies. Now, I know that's an uncomfortable situation for any insurer, because nobody wants to lose business, but that will go around and come around, because if everybody is sharing the information, then everybody has got the same opportunity, and that will aid those insurers like Vitality with switch and save and type processes to move people around. And it's what consumers expect. If you think about off-gen and energy, if you think about car insurance and other general insurances, moving from one to another has to be easy. Open banking is another example. PMI has to follow suit. We have to make the movement of policies much, much better and much, much easier.
And two very emotive topics there, medical underwriting and switching. I'm sure the advisors watching at the moment are going to have some views on that. You've got the question box and the comment box in the chat facility, so please share your thoughts and questions. I'd love to hear from you. Dr. Ali, do you have any views on that? We're talking about innovation, so surely kind of as part of this innovation piece, switching should be something that providers should be doing, or at least thinking about, so that they can make this ease of business flow better.
So I think there's a good point to be raised in terms of making the process as easy as possible for customers and making it as transparent as possible for them to get the right benefits and the right kind of policy construct for them. I suppose my question would be about whether this switching part is actually a smaller part of a wider issue, I think, around transparency, around visibility, to the point that Claire were making about simplification in general. Medical jargon is hard, I think, for lay people sometimes. Policy documents can be complex and long. So I think, from our perspective, particularly as healthcare continues and the products become more specific to individual needs, we continue on that journey of transparency to give people the clearest possible options for them.
Thanks, Ali. And any questions about underwriting, please do send them in. So let's have a look forward at the future. We've touched upon it already. From a clinical perspective, staying with you, Ali, what can we expect to see? Is PMI demand going to continue to rise in face of restricted access to care, as we see waiting? You mentioned waiting lists at the NHS. What are we going to see next? Is that going to ease, or are we going to continue to see struggles in that department?
So I think based on all of the things that we talked about earlier, our expectation is that there will continue to be lots of interest in the private medical insurance sector. If there's one thing that the past 18 months or so have taught us, it's that nothing is predictable. But certainly given the unease and uncertainty that lots of people have about the future, there is reassurance that people can take from private medical insurance policies. And I think that level of interest will continue from individuals who want to
we seem to have had some more internet issues there. So what about moving over to the employee space, Claire, while we wait for Ali's internet to come back? Are we going to see more focus on productivity, more focus on balancing hybrid ways of working? Are we going to see just interest increasing? I mean, what's happening within workplace wellbeing going forward, do you think?
I think we are going to see more interest in hybrid working, and of course that brings potentially issues for employers to around employee health and well-being, making sure their employees are well. It's much easier to do that if you're physically sitting in the same building as somebody. It's much more difficult to do that if you are remote. And we know that as a result of the pandemic, the mental health issue in this country is just going to, well, we know it's already increased, and that's just going to get worse. So there is absolutely going to be a focus on employee well-being, and it's, as we said earlier, that's where the products and services that we talk to our clients about will offer help and solutions. But it's our duty to make sure that the clients are aware of that. So just looking at mental health, we spoke earlier about the sort of information we were getting from the providers during the pandemic. There was a massive amount of information around looking out for employee burnout, which I found really interesting when I was reading it. To a certain extent, I was thinking, oh my God, this is me when I was reading it, and you hadn't recognized it in yourself. But actually giving our clients those sort of tips and giving them that information, the sort of things they can look out for if their employees are working remotely, is going to be really valuable advice. I think hybrid working is here to stay. Actually, I think it's here to stay whether an employer wants it or not. And I think there will be some employers that don't necessarily want it because it doesn't necessarily suit their business and their business model. However, I think that there will be a massive pressure on employers to actually adopt a hybrid way of working because there is so much noise about it. And if you don't embrace it, you could be seen as the employer that's the big bad employer, as opposed to the employer that is thinking more about their employees' sort of health and well-being, flexible working, etc. So I think this issue it is a real conundrum for some employers, because I do think employers do want the best for their employees, but obviously they want the best for their business, and for some that is being based in the office. But that, I think, that's going to be a difficult challenge for some employers. But regardless of whether they have people remote or whether they have people in the office, the issues that they face are going to be similar. There are bound to be mental health issues. There are bound to be, we touched on the MSK. There are some great things that employers can now get around helping with MSK issues. So health screens, I see you guys tie up with Blue Crest. Blue Crest do some really good screening in terms of the MSK, where you can buy a remote one, or you can actually have a physical session, and it's all focused on your posture, the way you're sitting, looking out to see if you have any MSK issues. I think that's a great thing for, and a fairly cost-effective thing that an employer can do that would really help an employee. Because if you're suffering with back pain, neck pain, etc., actually it can really have an impact on your productivity. So that's just one solution that an employer could look to put in for their workforce.
Yeah, we've all had to sort of face that isolation, you know, when it comes to working from home throughout the pandemic. So there's that impact on both mental health, physical health, and the sorts of services that are available through insurers today. You mentioned the Blue Crest health screening. There's things like Ascenti, PEPI's already been mentioned. All these things are kind of a part of this evolution. Ali, we've got you again. You were talking previously about the kind of the what's on the horizon from a clinical perspective. So should we sort of should we sort of open that one up again?
Yes, and sorry, my apologies, there'll be an email going to Virgin Media after this, and hopefully that won't happen again. So in terms of the clinical things that I think are really interesting from a pure clinical perspective, there is so much exciting stuff coming forward. The first one is the use of artificial intelligence in all of its different areas, whether it's for computer vision to automate kind of repetitive processes, such as looking at a mammogram or a pathology slide. The second one is disintermediation of clinicians. So where you have quite well stereotyped clear pathways to follow, such as checking your blood pressure, and humans are essentially following an algorithm, giving patients control to do that themselves and monitor their activity. The third one is the continuing growth of online digital care into pathways, rather than, I think, a lot of the more discrete bits of the journey that we see them, where patients have to carry things around. The fourth one is the increasing visibility into medical records, where more and more now, I think, being able to be the custodian of your own information, similar to the points made about open banking earlier, will allow you to kind of interrogate and understand that more for how you can look after your own health. And I think fifthly, it's the building on a huge resurgence in self-management and health improvement and being healthier. Actually, the amount of choice there is for consumers is phenomenal. There's almost too much choice. And there's so many good options, including some of the partners that we have in the Vitality program, that there is just lots of choice. In terms of how this flows into customers' hands through advisors and through PMIs, it's again going to be kind of working together to make sure that we have the right market scanning, making sure we're bringing the right populations, and we can provide a wide enough segment of options that can help support any company and any individual, whether it's one person or tens of thousands.
That's really interesting. And on that point, we've had some great questions coming in. A couple of points supportive of Ian's comments about switching. But this question here, I think, is very relevant to what you were just saying, Ali. Due to COVID anxiety and depression cases increasing, how can Vitality help members, not only employees, but also individuals with their mental health?
So we have seen a sustained rise in the number of people who are claiming for mental health conditions. And I think if we compare ourselves to the rate that we had in 2019, because in the earliest part of the pandemic, we actually saw a big drop in mental health case numbers, we think it's increased by approximately 1/3 too. For us, what's been so important is embedding mental health cover in all of our policies, whether it's individuals or larger organizations, and actually making sure people have access to good quality mental health care is really important. However, there is more to it than that. So much of the mental health concerns that people have can be protected against by people being healthier, having a healthier lifestyle, having integration. And that's a core part of our Vitality program. And secondly, in terms of the the anxiety that people generally have about the future and the stress that they've built up over the COVID pandemic. For us, there's something about the information that we provide and how we support members through that education living process, because there is so much information out there too.
And there's a point off the back of that actually around sort of increases in renewal premium. We're going to, one of our viewers has seen increases of 25% or more for members groups or group memberships within policies at renewal stage. So how can Vitality help in that tough market? And I suppose some of the things you've touched upon, already, Ali, around sort of what's built into the proposition are all relevant there.
So I think there are a few different things that we do at Vitality to address this, and we could probably talk about this for hours, so I'll try and keep it to 20 seconds. The first one is in terms of how we price. We try and be as transparent as possible through our ABC model, and to make sure that particularly for groups and larger schemes, if there are queries, we have advisors who are available to talk through the drivers on an individual basis and help explain what can potentially be contributing to that increase. The second one is, as you'd expect, we have a large team who look through every aspect of the healthcare spending pathway, from the partners that we work with in negotiations to hospitals to individuals, that actually address ways in which we can really bring down members' healthcare costs too. We've done tremendous work, I think, in significantly reducing it through everything from the Healthcare Purchasing Alliance to our approach to networks, to actually negotiating better and better kind of agreements with providers that allow us to continue to offer integrated mental health therapy. I'd be happy to talk more about those another time.
Sorry, yeah, thanks. Oh, sorry, Ali, carry on.
And the third thing is the Vitality program, because ultimately engaging with the Vitality program longer term will improve people's health, and that will have an effect in terms of their premium coming down if there are fewer claims, and the claims that happen are of lower severity. Sorry.
Thanks, Ali. No, it's a really thorough answer, and great to address the question from the audience there. We've had another one about profits being passed back to customers, but I think if we have time for that one, hopefully at the end. But I want to come back over to Ian. Ian, from an advisor's perspective, what's on the horizon? How do you expect to see the role of the advisor continue to evolve, given some of the things that we've discussed and the challenges that we face as a market, and opportunities too, no doubt?
Well, I don't necessarily think the role of the advisor will evolve greatly, because a good advisor is already focusing on the client needs and matching their client needs to the appropriate solution. So that will evolve slightly with wider conversations, and as we touched on earlier. I think the evolution that needs to happen over the coming months and years is more about service delivery and product. So a couple of things I'd like to touch on is that Claire was just talking about mental health, and Ali as well. We've seen this greater adoption of digital GPs because we've all been in this together. Everybody's had to revert to digital solutions for their banking, for their advice, for their guidance, and this is something that we should continue to promote and evolve. And when you look at mental health, getting access to a therapist for people is really, really key. And why can't we do that more digitally and promote that in a better way, as we have done with digital GPs? So I'd like to see that evolve more in terms of promotion and delivery, so that access is much easier. I've got a family member who is struggling from mental health conditions at the moment. For the first time, would never usually consider using a therapist, and the thought of going and see some sort of psychiatrist is actually quite frightening. So making that easier and more accessible, I think, is really, really important for both employees and general consumers. I'd also like to see greater value come from private medical insurance in terms of prevention and education and need. And I think there's some really interesting things going on. You mentioned, I think Claire earlier mentioned Blue Crest as one of those initiatives. Another one is Aviva's DigiCare for their life insurance policyholders, where every single year they're sent a fingerprint prick test, and they get a report back on their cholesterol, on their different health aspects. I think that's where PMI should be doing more, making that a stable part, not something people pay for, but something that is a part of their annual renewal review process. So so it'd be great to see if we can evolve those. And the final point is an underwriting point. And what's going to be really interesting is to see what is the impact on underwriting of long COVID. So much is unknown, but what we've got to be very careful about is that we don't start utilising something like long COVID, which is wide and broad in terms of excluding people from making claims. So clarity on how insurers are going to approach that that topic is going to be important for the future too.
I think we could probably do an entire speaker series on long COVID alone. That's a really great point, Ian. A couple of things to pick up on, maybe, Ali. First of all, PMI health screenings, isn't that something that we already do in the Vitality PMI proposition?
Absolutely, we have health screenings included, and we also, in addition to making them, really accessible at a low price to all members, we tier it so the people who are at the higher risk actually by far have the highest level of discounts to encourage the people who would benefit the most and have a more comprehensive health screening activity too. I think to pick up on the other 2 points raised, if I may, we work with My Online Therapy, who are a digital mental health provider who exclusively staff clinical psychologists, and we've been working with them for many months now, and that was so important to us, not just to provide digital therapy, because lots of the providers are providing that already, but actually to provide digital first, because there's such a different mindset. We don't see all mental health activity going to remote only. Lots of people are in environments where they're potentially in urban or smaller homes, or where the person that they live with is the one they want to discuss, with their therapist, where they don't feel comfortable having therapy at home. But actually maintaining that balance is important to us, and they've been a great partner to us so far. In terms of long COVID, or post-COVID syndrome, or however it's called, there is so little clarity about what this condition is going to be, how many people it's going to affect, and how it's going to continue. On one hand, I think the ONS numbers paint a very concerning picture about how many of the population will be affected with it. On the other hand, we don't know how it evolves with different strains of the virus, with different groups, with different ages, with different needs. And there was a recent study done that's shown actually, compared to the numbers reporting the symptoms, the numbers of them seeking healthcare and primary care from the Open Safely collaboration is actually relatively small. And I'm happy to share more information about that later. So it's a matter of watch this space. We have had long COVID claims come through, and we're funding them in line with our terms and conditions of our policies. So members are claiming on it.
Apologies, I've been on mute. First time I managed to right at the end of the webinar to leave myself on mute. So just saying thanks, Ali, for that. It's great to have some clarity around that issue, but definitely it's something to keep an eye on going forward as the picture becomes clearer. We're basically out of time. So just to kind of wrap things up, Claire, I wonder if there's any sort of like last things you wanted to say, maybe kind of any advice to any advisors out there on how best to meet the needs of clients in the present client, and then I think we'll say goodbye to all of the panelists.
Well, it's just repeating what we've already said, I think, Adam, that I've touched on and Ian's touched on as well, in terms of those wider conversations with clients, perhaps wider than we were having previously. And if you're looking at the future of PMI, just touching on Pepe that's been mentioned a few times, as a woman of 53 years of age, hurrah that you guys are doing that, because I remember sitting at an AMI conference a couple of years ago, and a chief executive of one of the insurers was talking about having this cradle to grave approach. And I went up to them afterwards, I said, what about the menopause? And they said, oh, we've not thought about that. So I'll mention it because it's dear to my heart, and actually it's great that you guys are doing it. Some of the other insurers are doing stuff as well, but it's those sort of conversations that we need to be brave about, and we need to be having with our customers in terms of, do you have these issues in the workplace? Do you think you have these issues in the workplace? Because these solutions are here for you in these products. So, there's help out there for you and your members.
And I think there's no better way to hit those sorts of things home other than with a personal story or personal experience. I think that's a really great example, Claire. Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for being a part of the discussion today. Thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in and for your questions and comments. Thank you very much. Please do remember that this content will be available on the Vitality Academy. So, and it is, depending on your role, you can qualify for 1 hour of unstructured CPD. So if you want to revisit any of the content today, feel free to visit the Academy, or we'll also be posting it on YouTube, and there'll be some follow-up sort of content off the back of it too, because I've definitely taken a lot from the discussion today. So I'll be looking to kind of formulate some of that into some sort of editorial perhaps. So again, thanks to all of our panelists for joining us. I'll leave you with a brief goodbye. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time on the Vitality Speaker Series. Take care.